Now, some of you might have seen Mark during the previous panel that we had. Mark Schwartz is with Amazon Web Services. He's an enterprise strategist. He'll be talking to us about the problem with product ownership. Everybody, please give Mark Schwartz a warm round of applause. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. So again, I'm Mark Schwartz, an enterprise strategist with Amazon Web Services. So I'm here from the cloud. As an enterprise strategist, I'm part of a small team of ex-CIOs and CTOs of large enterprises who've done digital transformations, moved to the cloud, et cetera, et cetera. And we spend a lot of time talking to large enterprises, to executives at enterprises about the various obstacles to transforming. And not surprisingly, especially given what I said before, it's a lot of the same concerns tend to come up a lot, and they were the same concerns that we had in the government when I was there. So before I joined AWS, I was the CIO at US Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is a part of the Department of Homeland Security. It is a large enterprise. My IT organization was about 2,000 people, and we had an IT budget of about $600 million a year, so pretty big enterprise. That was my only time in government. Before that, I was CIO of a company in San Francisco. Before that, CEO of a software company in Oakland. And I guess what happened one day was that I was reading a newspaper, reading an article about how messed up government IT was. And of course, my reaction right away was, I can fix it, let me at it, I'm gonna fix government IT. So I somehow got this job within Homeland Security, and after 7 years there, I realized that my work was done, we had fixed it, the US government was running like clockwork, everything was good. So it was time to move on to something else, so I wound up at AWS. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the product owner model, and I think the best way to start talking about the product owner model is to take you back to the late 1970s. So imagine, for me, this was the period when I was graduating from high school, and I had a summer internship working at a company, and I was working in their computer and MIS department. And if you can picture the scene, I think it's important to sort of get in your head what it looked like. The company that I was working for in my summer job had just bought an expensive new computer. This was a Data General something or other. And it was in a computer room. And if you were to walk to the lunchroom, you would pass by the computer room, and there's a window in the door. And if you looked inside, of course, it was air-conditioned, to freezing. And there's this big computer in the middle of the room, and there are these big tape drives that are the size of refrigerators, and the tapes are spinning like crazy. And there are a bunch of computer technicians in the room, and some of them are actually wearing white lab coats. And one of the technicians there was a guy named Igor. And he was the smartest computer scientist, right? Igor was just amazing. You'd be impressed by him. He was a little strange. So he wore like really thick glasses, and his hair kind of stood up, and he was walking around like this most of the time. And so one day, all of a sudden, the payroll system stops working. And so the manager in charge comes running into the computer room looking for Igor, and he finally finds the desk that Igor is sleeping underneath, and he wakes up Igor and he says, Igor, the payroll system's not working. And Igor looks around and he says, oh, maybe it's the emphatic bite munger that I did last week. It's the first time anybody has ever munged B++ plackets using cyclical nascency with a Kim Poppenlooper algorithm. and the manager has the reaction you would expect. And Igor, it's not working. Oh, should I do something about it? Yes, Igor. Fix now, Igor. So, if you are following my picture here, you have a company that is running just fine without IT, right? They've been doing things for centuries, not really, but a long time, using pencils and paper and other archaic things like that. And the business is running just fine, and then all of a sudden there's this big computer room and there's this weird guy, Igor, that you have to deal with, and you have no clue what he thinks he's doing. And it's a little bit of a shock, right? And I think the big problem that you have in your head if you're a manager then is how can I keep control over these computer people when I don't understand what they're doing? And here they go and munch plackets or something, and it costs the company so much money, and we've got this fancy new, something's happening here with the audio. We got all this fancy equipment that costs a ton, and how am I going to keep control over this? And I think a model starts to evolve where you have the stereotype of the IT person, this really geeky guy with the funny glasses, who doesn't speak English or Greek or whatever the language is. And the computer people are thinking about the non-computer people as, they wear suits and they do irresponsible things when we give them computers, and they don't understand anything, obvious, like you have to hit Control and Alt and Delete at the same time if the computer stops talking to you. We have to idiot-proof our software, was the term used. And you wind up with this dynamic where we talk about IT and the business as if those are two different things. And they were, really, because you had a business that was running fine, and then you had these IT people who had nothing to do with the rest of the business, except sometimes you had to ask them to do work. So, it's really unfortunate when you think about it, right? So, it turns out that the waterfall is a brilliant way to deal with this, right? Because with the waterfall, you can act as if the IT people are a contractor that's separate from the rest of the business, and you prepare a big requirements document to tell them exactly what you want them to do, because otherwise they're going to do other things. So you write it all down on paper, and you give it to them, and they give you back an estimate for how much it's going to cost you, and you negotiate the estimate. And then you give them the piece of paper again, and they go do the thing. And if it winds up taking longer than they said it would, or winds up being more expensive, they're in breach of contract, right? Well, come on, your commitment was you're going to do it in 6 months or whatever. So the waterfall model lends itself perfectly to this, kind of arm's length contractor relationship. And once we had this contractor relationship set up as the normal way of interacting with the IT organization, it was very easy to start thinking about outsourcing because it's already outsourced. You've outsourced it to Igor, and you might as well get a different company instead of Igor. So I think there's been this sort of dynamic since late 1970s or so of IT and the business, two separate things, arm's length, contractor relationship, business worried about how to control the IT people somehow. Well, all of that got fixed all of a sudden with Agile. Totally, nobody thinks that way anymore. It's all gone. Whenever the Agile Manifesto happened, 2001, all of a sudden we had other models for IT in the business where IT was no longer separate from the business. I'm lying. If you think about the Scrum model, for example, So I know now we no longer do this waterfall thing of negotiating a schedule with the software developers and holding them accountable for their commitments. Instead, at the beginning of each 2-week sprint, we ask them to commit to what they're going to finish. And at the end of the 2 weeks, if they haven't done what they said, well, I don't know about you guys. What's wrong with your process? It seems broken. In the waterfall model, you had, the thinking was that you have people from the business, people from IT. The people from the business know what's valuable to the business because they're from the business. That's why they write the requirements. They decide what has business value, and then they tell the IT people what has business value. The IT people go and build some product and give it back to the business people. So the IT people aren't accountable for outcomes. They're just accountable for the output of the software that they've been asked to produce. Well, in Scrum, let's say, that's all solved, not really, because you now have a product owner who's drawn from the business, and you have a technical team, and the product owner is in charge of deciding what's valuable to the business and telling the technical team. And the technical team then is on the hook for delivering the product that they've been asked to deliver, and then they give it back to the product owner, who then goes and makes sure it gets implemented or rolled out in a business process so that the organization can get the business value from it. So in a way, we've taken this big IT versus the business relationship and shrunk it down to a team where the IT people can't be accountable for outcomes because they're not the ones who decide what features get built or what user stories or whatever. That's the product owner. On the other side, you've got the business, and the business's job is to tell the IT people what to do, and then to sort of keep on it week after week and make sure things are progressing and harvest the business value. So if you see where I'm going with this, we think we've changed our way of thinking a lot when we move to Agile approaches, but I'm not really sure we have. What we've really done is maybe moved a step in the right direction, but we've kept a lot of those same ideas about having to control the IT people, the geeks, because if we don't control them, then they're just going to go off and do other things. So this way, we say, what exactly are you going to do in 2 weeks? And they tell us, and then we make sure 2 weeks later that we check on that. So they didn't have time to do, cyclical nascency, Kim Poppen-Looper algorithms, or whatever Igor was working on. I think, though, the stereotypes are not valid anymore. And I hear too many people say, IT people, they just want to fool around with the technology. They don't really care about the business. I think James was saying a lot of the same as I would say about government employees, for example. They're really passionate about the mission. And I think in most companies, if the technical employees are not passionate about what the company does, they're at least passionate about creating things that are useful for everybody else and getting those smiles from all the users. So the IT people, they don't fit the stereotype for the most part. And in fact, this guy, Igor, this actually was somebody I knew. This is a real person, more or less. Igor, when he heard that the payroll system was down, he was thinking to himself, what could have gone wrong? What did I do that might have caused this problem? And he went off deep in thought, and he figured it out in his head, and the manager he was talking to didn't really understand that that's what he was doing. And when he said he had been munging plackets or whatever, he wasn't doing that because it was fun. He was doing that because he was trying to optimize the system, because he was afraid that the company, when it was hiring, the payroll system wouldn't scale well, right? It would start to slow down. So Igor had been thinking ahead, and he was working on exactly the right thing. He actually understood the business maybe even better than the manager. And why not? There's nothing that says that IT technologists are not interested in doing what's good for the business. It's never been that way, but it certainly isn't right now. So looking at Scrum, for example, and looking at that product owner role, I think I'm probably not the only one who's experienced this. It's very hard to get a good product owner. I know there are a bunch in the audience, so all the good product owners are here today, and all companies don't know what to do, I'm sure. But often there is a pattern where somebody who's a really good business expert is unavailable to be working with an IT organization to develop new software, because their managers are jealously guarding them and saying, no, you can't go and do that. I need you here day to day. We've had, at USCIS, we had the problem of a large set of tasks or a large set of business problems that a limited number of teams had to work on. This might sound familiar to some of you also. And so they were working on one side of the business, and there was a product owner drawn from that side of the business. And the project kept going on and on and on because the product owner saw herself as being in charge of getting things from the IT organization for the people she worked with. And they had a lot of things they wanted. So the backlog just kept growing and growing and growing and growing. And we were never able to move the team onto the challenges of another part of the business. And that's sort of natural, I think, that there are always a lot of things that would add business value by some definition of business value, but there might be other organizational priorities over there. The business owner has been charged with doing the things that will add business value for whatever their part of the business is. So I found a number of challenges working with the product owner role, which I joke and say, it's not a good role. I think I always wound up using product owners in the end. I just think we have to rethink a little bit what that role actually is, and what it probably shouldn't be is something that's in between the business and the team. It's in the IT world, this is essentially a loose coupling model, right? Where you have the business, the team, and there's something in the middle that's like an interface, and there's no direct communication on either side, right? It makes the team loosely coupled to the rest of the business. And I think that's kind of what the product owner role has evolved to. So what's the alternative? I tried something at USCIS, and I want to sort of outline how it worked. And it might not be appropriate for every organization or every business problem. I think it probably isn't. But maybe it'll give you some ideas of different ways to think about it. The goal, my train of thought when we started doing this was, I want the team to be accountable for outcomes, not just for producing software. And I want the whole team to feel that accountability. Not in the sense of we're going to blame them if it doesn't work. I mean accountability in the sense of they actually own an outcome and can have the satisfaction of delivering it. So that was one goal. A second goal I alluded to before. The big challenge in our environment and the government was not necessarily the technical part of developing things. It was the entire value stream, where to get from a mission need to a deployed capability, there was all this overhead of investment management and oversight. For DHS, for an IT project, we actually had to write about 100 different documents, literally. One of those documents alone generally took 18 months to prepare. We had 13 stage gate reviews. And it was a typical pattern in DHS because there were so many layers of oversight. And in fact, if you go all the way up, Congress oversees each of the federal departments. And DHS somehow had wound up with 104 different congressional committees overseeing it. And of course, they never agreed with each other, right? So you have to satisfy 104 different bodies ultimately with anything you do. And that makes for really a lot of overhead in the process. So the question was, can we get some of that overhead out of the process, speed up delivery time, and get rid of a whole bunch of the 104 documents we had to write and all the oversight meetings and sign-offs and whatever. So the scheme that we tried, I have to outline what the business problem was for a second to make it clear what we did. So the situation was we have a system called E-Verify, which is something that employers can use to make sure that their employees are eligible to work in the United States. And it's not required for all employers to use it, only a small group of employers does. And it's mostly automated. So in 98.6% of the cases, it can figure out whether the person's eligible to work in the United States. In 1.4% of the cases, it's manual. Somebody has to step in and figure it out. And we thought that there was going to be some sort of immigration reform happening. And when that actually happens, it never did, but when it happens, there's going to be a big fight in Congress, and there's going to be lots of arguing back and forth. And ultimately, they're going to come to a negotiated agreement. Okay, it doesn't sound likely, but maybe they'll negotiate an agreement. And at that point, we're suddenly going to find out what we have to implement on the IT side. In fact, when President Obama invented this DACA thing, his big political initiative around immigration, I found out because I happened to be watching the news one night, and there he was announcing that he was rolling out DACA and that it was going to be rolled out within 60 days. And I thought, it would have been really nice if he had checked with me first to make sure that we could actually do it in 60 days. But that's what would happen if there was big immigration reform. We'd suddenly find out we had 60 days. And this E-Verify system would probably be a bargaining chip, and they'd wind up making a deal that all employers had to use it all the time for every employee. And if that happened, the scale would, have to go like that all of a sudden. So that was the business challenge. How can we quickly make this thing able to scale? And we realized this was not a technical problem because we're using the cloud and it scales very easily. The problem was that manual work, that 1.4% of the cases that a human being has to touch, and people don't scale really well. It takes a while to make a baby and train them to program or review cases and all of that. So if we suddenly had to have many, many, many orders of magnitude more cases, we wouldn't have enough people to process them, and we wouldn't have enough people to look for fraud and misuse and all this other stuff that we needed people to do. So it was a human problem. And so we decided to modernize our systems to try to solve those problems. How can we make it possible to scale the human beings? And when I got to the agency, they had been working on this for a while. The IT organization had been working on it for 4 years, and they had produced a really beautiful binder of paper. In fact, there were 4 binders of paper, it was like this, of requirements. They had decided that there were going to be 85 capabilities and 340 features and something like that, and they documented them all, and they were starting to put them through this oversight process, and they actually hadn't done anything in the 4 years. So the leader of the business unit and I decided this is a great opportunity to try a new way to do IT. So with that as the background, I'll explain what we did. We said, we're throwing away the paper. It's 4 years of wasted effort. It's a sunk cost. And instead, we're going to decide what the goals of the project are specifically. And we realized there were 5 goals, that if we accomplish those 5 goals, the system would be able to scale like we needed. And one of the goals was that 98.6% had to go up to a higher number, closer to 100%, right? So that's one goal. Another goal, the people who had to do these things manually, they could process 70 cases a day. but we needed them to be able to process a lot more than 70 cases a day. So second goal, make that 70 number go up. A third goal had to do with signups for the thing. When companies signed up to use the system, we discovered there is like a shopping cart abandonment rate problem. In the sign-up process, only 40% actually made it through, and that wasn't going to scale very well. So increase the successful sign-ups. That was goal number 3. The other 2 had to do with fraud and national security and stuff, so I won't talk about those. But we said our goal in this program is those 5 goals, nothing else, that's it. And then we took the radical step of saying there are no requirements, there are those 5 goals, that's it. And the business case is about accomplishing those 5 goals and how much money we think it's going to cost. So we said, whatever the numbers were, we're going to spend $1 million on each of these goals. And we went to the oversight body way up there, and we said, we don't think you need any information aside from what I just said. $1 million, those 5 goals, that's our business case. And you decide whether it's worth $1 million to solve those 5 things. And we're not going to write requirements. We're not going to write 100 documents. We're just going to discuss whether it's worth spending that money on those 5 goals. If you think about it, requirements are actually a risk in IT. And what I mean is, if you know what your objective is, and somebody translates that objective into a set of requirements, then they've added the risk that those requirements will not actually accomplish the objective, right? And we know that very often requirements don't accomplish the objective they're supposed to accomplish. I think there was a study by Microsoft that found that 1/3 of ideas actually solve the business problem that they were supposed to solve. 1/3 of ideas have the opposite effect, and 1/3 of ideas don't do anything at all relative to the goal. So you are adding a big risk as soon as you write a requirement. Sounds a little strange, but we told the oversight body that that was the case. Let's agree how much we want to spend for a goal. All right. So we agreed with them that that was reasonable and that we should spend about $1 million on accomplishing each of these goals. And then we took the first of those goals, actually the one where we said 70 cases a day, that needs to be a higher number, and we gave that goal to a team. No requirements. We said, team, you're in charge of making that number 70 go up to a higher number. And it was a truly cross-functional team. James talked about this a little bit before. So when I say truly cross-functional, not just development and testing and operations, but business expertise and policy expertise. So one team that has all of those skills together has the complete set of skills that they would need in order to make that number 70 go higher. And we said, team, you do whatever you think is right to make the number go higher. If you decide that you don't even need to write any code, you're just going to change a business process, that's fine. Just do that. If you think writing some code would be a good idea, go ahead and write code. Do whatever is going to increase that number. And because you have a DevOps environment all set up for you, and you have the cloud, and you have everything you need, you should be able to start showing results tomorrow on that number. You should be able to start deploying new code today, or changing business process, or whatever it is. So in 2 weeks, we're going to have a conversation where we ask you what that number now is. It was 70. It's 70 today. So 2 weeks from now, tell us what the number is. And then we'll do the same thing every 2 weeks after that. We'll discuss the number. And then we'll have a conversation around it. That's what oversight is going to look like from now on. You can tell us what you did to get the number higher. You can tell us what else you tried that didn't work the way you thought, and tell us what you think you're going to do next. But for every number of cases above 70, we're going to give you a little gold star. You know, 1 gold star if it's 71, 2 gold stars. Of course, I would have said I was going to give them a big bonus, but this was the government, and I couldn't do that, right? So gold stars you get. And I said, if you do anything that is not intended to raise that number from 70, then we're going to take you outside and shoot you as an example. Because this is the first time we're trying this experiment, we got to set an example. So that was the incentive structure that we set up. And that was the control for scope creep, right there. You can't do anything that's not intended to raise that number 70. And so we started the process with an exercise in impact mapping. If any of you are familiar with it, it's a framework developed by Gojko Ajic in a book of that name. The basic idea is you sit down and you draw a mind map of different possible ways of accomplishing a goal. And so we started with that goal, number 70. Now we're going to make the number higher. And we had a brainstorming session around that with management sitting down with the team and co-brainstorming, essentially. And the things that they brainstormed turned into a set of hypotheses about what might make that number go up. And then we said to the team, take that mind map and throw it out if you don't want to use it. But here we all put our heads together. We think these things might work, so you have a starting point and you can start working on things tomorrow. Test the hypotheses, whichever ones you think are the good ones. Add more hypotheses, whatever. But try to prioritize the things that are going to make the number go up quickest. So in 2 weeks, we could sit down with the team and they would say, okay, the number is 75 now. And we would say, hooray, 5 gold stars. What do you do to get it there? What do you think is going to happen next? And we would repeat this process every 2 weeks. So notice there aren't any requirements in this whole thing, in the whole scheme. And there's no special product owner. We did have somebody we called a product owner on the team who was supposed to have subject matter expertise and would likely come up with a lot of those hypotheses about what would work. But they didn't have a special position. It was the team as a whole that was supposed to figure this stuff out by using all of each other's brilliance, essentially. And we figured, the concept of T-shaped people in DevOps teams, right? You want people who are broad, but very deep in some specialty area. And if you get a whole team of people like that, you have a lot of generalist skills, and you also have a lot of depth in certain areas. And we said, why shouldn't we have, including in our T-shape, why wouldn't we include business skills and technical skills? So if we have some technologists who know a lot about the business, that's great. And if we have some business people who know a lot about the technology, that's great. Generalist skills are really good. Let's put them all on a team so that they have everything they need. And so we watched the number go up from 70. And we had agreed with the overseers that every month we were going to come back to them, and we were going to give them the option of discontinuing the work. And so after a month, we showed them a graph of this metric, 70, 75, whatever. And we said, look, it's going up. We think we should keep investing in this. Is that okay? And they said, that's okay. And then with the other metric about the shopping cart abandonment rate, we saw it go like this, and then it plateaued out. And when we talked to the team, they told us all the things they were trying to make it start going up again, and nothing was moving, and we agreed with the team. When I say we, this is me and the business unit leader. We agreed with them that they were doing all the right things. It didn't seem to be moving. So when we went back to the oversight committee, we said, look, it did this, and we don't think it's worth spending any more money on this objective. So even though we were going to spend more money on this, we're giving it back. We don't want to use it. And we did that with each of the goals. We were able to each month give evidence that it's either worth investing some more or not investing more. If we're going to stop investing in this one, maybe we can take some of the money and put it against one of the other goals. And we just repeated this cycle. It was, the original plan was to spend another 4 years doing this project. After 2.5 years, the team basically went to the oversight body and said, we're done. We've already accomplished all the goals to the extent that we think they can be accomplished, so take the money back. This had never been done in a government project before, as far as we knew. And it was really startling. But to sort of sum up the whole scheme, we had managed somehow to get results in production on the first day instead of waiting 4 years while we wrote requirements and put them through an oversight process. So we had speeded the lead time. We had managed to make the whole team accountable for getting actual results, making the number 70 go up. The team as a whole had that accountability. The product owner was there to add expertise and help communication with the business users and everything else. The product owner was welcome to be technical. The technical people were welcome to be business-oriented. The team as a whole could support each other. And we were able to do it in a way that was financially maybe the most responsible way that we could have done, satisfied the oversight bodies. They actually realized that they had a lot more control this way than they usually had on a big waterfall project. So it worked beautifully. After I left the agency, they continued to use this with a bunch of other projects. And I think this is what we really mean by agility when you think about it. It's not taking that old waterfall process of we need to control the technical people, and we're going to do it through having a product owner who says what they should do and having these sprint commitments and yada yada. Instead, we said, let's make a team that's truly a joint team where IT and the business aren't two separate things. They're actually the same thing. They're actually working together in every way. And we can charge them with these accountabilities and get the spirit of a team trying to accomplish mission or business results or whatever, mobilize all of the spirit behind that. And to me, this is really what the Agile Manifesto meant. This is what we've been trying to do all this time with Agile thinking. It's just that we had this mental framework, and when we started to break out of it with Scrum and extreme programming and all, we didn't go far enough. We didn't reject the basic premises of it. So I propose this as at least the starting point for a rethinking of product ownership and healing this business and IT sort of divide that we've always had. And so I'm going to stop now because I'd love to hear your questions on this, because I'd really like to work with the community to see how we can do things like this and what other ideas might work.
Okay. I see some of our friends from downstairs are slowly filtering in. Let's take some questions, shall we?
Thank you. May I ask a question how big the team was that was working on this project, and how well known they were with the subject and with each other?
Yeah. So each of those objectives, there were 5 objectives, and each objective got one team of about 10 people. It's a little complicated in this case because in the government we did everything through contractors, especially because it had become a Republican administration, and Republican administrations think government workers are stupid and everything has to be outsourced. So through the contractors we had specified that they were going to give us teams of, I think, 9 people with all the technical skills. And then we added a couple of government people, and some of them had crossover skills. So something like 10 people on each team. And they had been working on other projects for that business unit. So they knew the business unit somewhat, and especially the government people that we added had some knowledge. But some of them just had to learn as they went, and I thought of it as kind of a pairing thing, If you've got somebody who knows the technology and they're working together with somebody who knows the business, then the knowledge starts to cross over a little bit. What else can I tell you about that? There definitely was a product owner, and the product owner had the expertise, so the people who were reviewing these cases and could do 70 a day, the product owner was actually a manager of those people, and he had experience doing it. And it was absolutely a critical part of the whole thing. I'm sort of exaggerating the lack of role of a product owner. As a real subject matter expert. It just wasn't a position that sort of had authority to decide what's valuable to the business in the absence of everybody else agreeing.
Okay, we have another question over here.
Thank you. I would like to, here.
Where's the voice?
Here.
All right, that's great. Everybody point in the right direction. That's good. Okay.
I would like to know how granular were these goals, and what do you think the impact of granularity of goals might have? Because if a goal is something like completed in a year, it could be something like that. So what is the impact of that?
Yeah. So the granularity happened to work out perfectly, and not only that, but the fact that the goals were quantifiable. Right? You don't always have quantifiable goals, and that made this really easy. So the granularity was one step down from strategic objective. Strategic objective from the senior leaders of the agency was, we have to be able to scale this thing because Congress is going to suddenly tell us we have to. And then that cascaded down into these 5 goals. In theory, it could be anywhere in a cascade. You know, it could be, here's the senior leadership goal, that cascades down into this goal, that one into this goal, that one into this goal, and those are the goals, you know, that you do. The challenge with that is every time you do that cascade, you have that same kind of requirements risk. You add risk that you might not have created the right sub-goals. So the closer you can come to that senior leadership goal, the better. And in our case, it happened to work really well. But I can imagine business situations where it's a little bit harder and you have to cascade a little bit to get the right granularity.
Here, in front. Me.
Gotcha.
Hi. That was a great speech, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question about how you faced any challenges with the mindset of people, especially the developers, because I know sometimes they're difficult, you know, to start discussing about business, and you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Sometimes they say, okay, I just write code, I don't even want to test my code, so let's get another role. So this is a leap to a higher, let's say, challenge for them.
Yeah. I think what I said in the panel discussion still holds. What I found generally was that people wanted to do the right thing, and there were just so many impediments that they were frustrated. And so here, I was essentially saying to the team, you don't have to spend 4 years writing documents. You don't have to go through this complicated oversight process where everybody's going to say no to you. You don't have to, have people on your case saying you're not performing because you didn't meet your sprint commitments, whatever. And by the way, the reason why you're here at this agency is to improve the immigration system. Go do it. Improve the immigration. It wasn't a very hard sell in that sense. Yes, there are some technical people who say, I'm a programmer and I don't want to do infrastructure, I don't want to do testing. Those people are really not going to have a home in a DevOps process no matter how you look at it. And you can change them, I think. So I'm speculating really because I found it easier. I didn't have to try really hard. But I think a lot of the change comes from being part of a team that is sort of setting norms. If the rest of your peers on your team are very enthusiastically trying to make the number go up from 70, maybe a pretty good chance that you're going to catch the fever also.
We have one final question just here.
Oh, this time I watched the microphone go. That was good.
Hello. Considering the initial image of Igor that you described, and pretty much having in mind the change of mindset, and of course the participation of the team in order to achieve the goals, how would you approach the shape-shifting of that image, Igor's image, in order to be able to better boost, let's say, the goals that were set?
Say that again. How do we? What?
You have a very, very skilled, very, as you said, on the T example, the T-shaped of resources and the skills. You have a very vertical skilled resource. Would you consider, let's say, that the resource being more active in towards the roles of ownership, the product ownership, area? or you would limit that to just the guy that was tasked with the role of product ownership?
So I think maybe the answer is, the way we thought about it is the team has to have whatever it needs to accomplish the goal. And the job of management, my job or whatever, is to make sure they have what they need on the team, whether that's one product owner, two, this many subject matter experts, whatever. And if they felt like they didn't have the right resources, they should raise that to me as an impediment. And I, as a servant leader, should try to fix it by, changing the team composition or whatever. But I had no business micromanaging any of that, right? Team, make it go up from 70. If there's something you need from me to help you, tell me what it is. I'll try to get it for you. And that get it for you might mean that I needed certain functional specialties, certain business experts, almost anything else. It was totally determined just by the objective. That's the magic of the whole scheme.
Thank you very, very much. Fantastic talk.
Thank you.
I think that was very useful,
right.
and big round of applause. Thank you so much.
So
All right.
everybody, if anybody thinks these ideas are useful and can try them out, please let me know how it works. That's really the point, right? I can't do these experiments anymore. I'm not a CIO anymore, so you have to do them for me.
Thank you, thank you. All right.